Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Walking Dead video. So Andrew Lincoln and Danai Gurira actually did an interview, a very recent interview. I think this article actually was written a couple of days ago. Though actually what I'm seeing is that this was written by SFX magazine and the magazine actually comes out on July 10th. So yeah, I guess this isn't even out yet, but they wrote an article, I guess, on their talk of, there's some interesting musical talk here that I'll get into in a second. But Andrew Lincoln also talks about, whether or not he will return as Rick Grimes in the future. So yeah, I want to break down his comments there. So before we go any further, make sure to be a subscriber if you want all of my Walking Dead content. And in about 2 weeks from now, we're going to be getting Comic-Con. There's going to be a bunch of announcements of this and that and whatever. And obviously, I'll do breakdowns of all that. The panel is most likely going to be announced on Friday, unless the panel's on a Thursday. But usually Comic-Con announces their panels exactly 2 weeks beforehand, right? So if they're having their show on the 26th, which is a Friday, then they'll announce it this Friday on July 12th. If it's the Thursday on the 25th, then they'll announce their panel on the 11th, right, of July. So it really depends on when they're actually going to have the panel here. I'm expecting it to be the Friday, so I'm expecting that we will get an announcement on Friday, unless maybe they do it on Saturday. I don't know. Saturday to me is always like the big day for like movies and whatnot. I think television shows, usually from what I remember anyways, are like on Fridays and whatnot. So I'm expecting that, yeah, on Friday for sure, we'll get an announcement of the panel and everything. We'll learn more about just, like what to expect, the cast that's going to be there. I think we'll get two panels. I think we're going to get a panel for Daryl Dixon season 2 and Dead City season 2 as well. It doesn't mean that's the only thing they're going to be talking about, because obviously they always do like announcements, or they'll announce casting stuff and all of that stuff throughout the panel. That usually happens in like the Q&A section. Like whenever they're talking to Scott Gimple or like the showrunners and stuff, they're the ones that will make all these big announcements and talk about this and that, which I'm expecting some more stuff happening this year, just because things have been pretty quiet for the last however long. So yeah, so stay tuned for that. But let's get into what Andrew Lincoln had to say here. And again, I got this from gamesradar.com, so I'll leave a link down below if you do want to go and check out the article. Andrew Lincoln talked about whether or not he would ever return as Rick Grimes, and this is what he had to say here. This, for me, felt that we could comfortably say that that's done. That's a reunion. That's the perfect iteration of a story that I thought wasn't going to happen for a time. And then Danai and Scott both said, we need to reunite. We got to do an epic love story. I went, that's a great idea, and let's tell the story of the CRM and do what the grown-ups have been doing, and maybe some filling in, because I love all of that. I'm a bit of a geek for all of the mythology and what's going on, what's been happening, so the short answer is never say never, because if there's a good enough place to put Rick in that we haven't seen before, there are characters out in the universe that I would love to act with again, but it has to be a really, really, really good story. So analyzing his comments, I was a bit confused at first, because he says, this for me felt that we could comfortably say that that's done. That's a reunion. That's the perfect iteration of a story that I thought wasn't going to happen for a time. I thought he was talking about the ones who live there. Maybe he is, but then he continues with, and then Danai and Scott both said, we need to reunite. We need to do an epic love story. So when I read that, I'm like, all right, so he's talking about something else beforehand. And he thought, well, I guess that's it. Like, that's how all this was going to happen or whatever. And then Danai and Scott both said, oh no, like we need to reunite. We need to do this epic love story. So I wonder if what Andrew Lincoln was talking about there was maybe the original story of what was going to happen, or maybe even like the season 9 ending, just sort of his death on the show, or his apparent death on the show anyways, right? So I don't really know what he meant here, but maybe he just he meant the same thing. He just sort of spoke about it in a weird way, because he says, this for me felt that we could comfortably say that that's done. That's a reunion. That's a perfect iteration of a story that I thought wasn't going to happen for a time. So is he talking about the ones who live? Let's just assume that. And then he says, and then Danai and Scott both said, we need to reunite. We've got to do an epic love story. I went, that's a great idea. And let's tell the story of the CRM and do what the grown-ups have been doing. And maybe some filling in, because I love all of that. So when I hear that, I'm like, all right, well, yeah, I don't know. Again, it's a little confusing. So I'm like, you're talking about doing this because, this felt like you could just leave it here. It was really good. And then they came to you saying, oh, we have to reunite and do all this. And you're like, okay, yeah, that'd be really awesome, right? So I'm not entirely sure what he meant there. That's a little confusing, but none of that really matters anyways, because it's the next part here that I think a lot of fans are going to really like. And that is, he says, I'm a bit of a geek for all of the mythology and what's going on, what's been happening. So the short answer is never say never, because if there's a good enough place to put Rick in that we haven't seen before, there are characters out in the universe that I would love to act with again, but it has to be a really, really, really good story. And so I think that is really what it comes down to, is the ones who live, like they really wanted to tell that story, because there was a lot of loose ends with Rick Grimes and Michonne and just the Grimes family story in general. It was just like, obviously you had to tell that story. So they told that story, they wrapped up all those loose ends, but there is still that question out there of, Rick reuniting with Daryl and with Morgan and a lot of other characters. There's so much story out there that I think, obviously needs to be told. And so I think that's why the question of, returning and reuniting with all these characters is still there, is because there is sort of it's not completely told. Like, Rick Grimes' story is like, he got the happy ending and whatnot at the end, but it's not completely done because he never reunited with everyone else. And the overall story, yes, he returned with Judith and RJ, but if you look at it, like, first of all, he never went back to Alexandria. They reunited in a field. We never got to see everyone else's reaction. Like, there's quite a bit of stuff out there that I'm like, I think there's still more to tell there. And I think they all know that, because Andrew Lincoln actually talked about that in an interview that came out like months ago. This is probably around February, March, around the time that the show was ending. Actually, it may have even been around like literally when the show ended, like interviews afterwards. But like, he talked about, how he and Scott Gimple talked about, how he, or Rick Grimes, would reunite with other characters like Daryl and everyone else, right? So they've had discussions about all of that. So obviously, I'm sure, like, discussing that, talking about the possibilities of that, you're not just going to be like, oh yeah, that'd be cool, but yeah, we're not going to do that. Like, it seems like the story needs to be really good. And this is always something that they all say. Like, the one thing that I've learned is that all the actors from The Walking Dead, and not even just The Walking Dead, other shows as well, they all say the same thing like this, like, oh, I'm never going to return unless the story's really, really good. And even if the story's not the best, they'll still return and they'll be like, oh, I just love the story here. I needed to, I need to be a part of this. And I'm so happy to be a part of this. Lenny James said the same thing. Like, he said that, he's done as Morgan unless there's something new that you could tell with the character, but it would have to be something that, obviously he would be very interested in, because I don't think he wants to do Fear the Walking Dead again. I think that was just like, obviously for Morgan, like, oh man, I feel bad for Morgan, because Morgan is one of the best characters in the show. Just the overall, like, everything Walking Dead, and he should have been a part of The Walking Dead. Like, he should have been a part of The Walking Dead for a lot longer. Like, honestly, when you look at all the leading characters, Morgan's a really amazing character to lead The Walking Dead. Like everybody focused on Daryl right away, right? But Morgan is a really incredible character in the Walking Dead universe, and he has connections to Rick in the very beginning. I think you just had to give him a really good story. And yeah, I mean, you put him on Fear the Walking Dead, and it was just, obviously, the story of that show. You had the showrunner and the writers and all that writing story from Morgan there. It just hurt the character overall. So I would love to see the character back in some way. What I will say is it's very interesting. So I want to get to the other part of the article here that is, it gets into the whole musical thing. And the reason why this is interesting is because Danai Gurira actually says that her and Scott Gimple have been talking about, just, I guess, doing a musical or whatever. And I guess they're like joking about it and stuff. And what's interesting about that is because, again, I don't know when this article was actually like, or when the interview happened for the article or SFX magazine. I'm assuming it was probably a month ago, because around that point, everyone was sort of promoting The Ones Who Live and whatnot. So I think over the last month, that's most likely when they were doing a lot of this. And I think that it really, like, it's interesting because Danai says that her and Scott Gimple have been talking and whatnot. And so to me, that sort of gives us a glimpse at, like, behind the scenes as to what's happening, right? Like, they're just talking and joking about how they can make a musical work. Because, with the Ones Who Live, the main drivers behind that series were Scott Gimple and Danai Gurira, right? Like, Andrew Lincoln was involved, I'm sure, but like, I think he leaves the writing to Danai Gurira and Scott Gimple when it comes to a lot of that. And I do think whatever the next story is, Danai Gurira is going to be way more involved in the story as well, because I think she wrote episode 4 here. Really incredible episode. She'll probably write another episode, but I could see her honestly being way more involved in terms of, like, creative decisions and all of that. I'm sure she was already with The Ones Who Live, but I think even more so, like, with the new series. And so it's interesting to think that her and Scott Gimple are just talking and eventually started joking around about doing a musical, because to me, I mean, ignoring the musical part, I'll get my thoughts on that in a second, but it just shows that they're talking about stuff, they're trying to work some stuff out. They're working on a story, like they're doing stuff, right? So I'm very, very excited for that. And I don't know where that goes eventually. I mean, it's been months now, and they're still talking and whatnot. So obviously that's a positive sign, because I think they know that, Rick and Judith talking a lot more, Rick and RJ talking, like there's a lot of things that you can do specifically with the Rick Grimes character. And I think for Danai Gurira as well, like, she is somebody that she's very creative. And I just look at it like, you have this opportunity to tell a really amazing story now. Like, before on The Walking Dead, you were just playing a character. You know, you were just playing Michonne. You weren't really involved creatively. Maybe you would do different things like in a scene or something, but you weren't really that involved creatively, right? But now with The Ones Who Live, like, I believe she was an executive producer. She wrote an episode and whatnot. And now you're talking with Scott Gimple about, you know, I guess working on the next part of the story. And to me, when I see all that, I'm like, you're really in an amazing position, because you could honestly come up with a really amazing story here. And you know, fans are going to love the next Rick and Michonne story. And that's what's really exciting about a lot of this here, is that, I mean, first of all, if you go back to looking at Danai Gurira's comments, you know, regarding a season 2 or like a new Rick and Michonne story, you know, she would say, well, I can't talk about it, this and that. She did an interview at one point talking about a hypothetical of, you know, like what the next story would be. And what she said was like, roughly, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it was basically, well, you know, like the CRM are still out there, but like obviously Rick and Michonne would probably, like, they would have to balance their family life with, like, you know, helping out people. So they would probably be working with the CRM to help people and like deliver supplies to people and all of that, but also balancing that with like their family life and whatnot, right? So that was a really interesting comment, because that means that she thought about what would happen next for the characters. And so I think, you know, the fact that they've been talking, Danai Gurira said that her and Scott Gimple have been talking, you know, and that this interview most likely happened in like the last month, I'm assuming so, right? There's no way this happened around the time The Ones Who Live ended and they're only releasing it now. Like, this must have happened sometime in the last month. And I think it's really good, because obviously it means that they're working on something. I don't think we're going to get an announcement at all at Comic-Con for anything, but what I will say though is we'll have to listen to like how Scott Gimple's going to talk about it, because obviously he's going to be asked about like Rick and Michonne returning, this and that, and we got to see how he talks about it, right? If he just says, you know, I hope so, then we're basically in the same place that we're in right now. But if he says, you know, things are moving along, this and that, but, you know, we want the best story or whatever. If he says things like that, then it's just like, okay, now we can all get excited, because obviously like they're getting somewhere with the story, right? So we'll have to wait and see. But let's talk about what Danai Gurira actually said here, which is, I mean, I've been seeing a lot of reaction online, and it is kind of hilarious. So she was actually talking about doing a musical, and they're just joking around here. But I will say there's certain comments that she makes where I'm like, I don't know if that sounds like you're joking around. Maybe you're actually kind of considering this. So what she says here, and again, I don't know what the question was that was asked. Like the question could have been like, are you involved creatively in anything else Walking Dead related? And then maybe she's talking about something and then eventually just says, I was just joking around about having a Walking Dead musical on Broadway. Me and Gimple are actually chatting about it, which is ridiculous. He just said, we don't have the rights to it. I'm like, well, let's talk to Kirkman. Let's see what he says to that. I mean, we're really largely just joking around, but stranger things have been done, and I do love the theater. It's about how do you confine it to something, because it's just so much story. So it would really be, how do you confine it to a good 2 or 3 hour play? And I think that, yeah, if you were to do a musical, like, it really depends on how you do it. So if you're doing it on like Broadway and whatnot, then I think that's fine. I think if you did something like that, amazing. I think that that's good for the franchise. I mean, obviously a lot of people that don't like musicals aren't going to go and watch it. I'm not the biggest fan of musicals. It's Walking Dead related, so I might check it out. I might be interested. It might be the only musical I ever watch. But again, it would be for a different audience for sure. But that's good for the franchise. It's good for The Walking Dead in general to do that. And I think for a story, what you would tell would probably have to be, I mean, that's the difficult thing, right? Is like, how would you tell that story overall and make it just make sense? Because if you look at The Walking Dead, there's so many characters everywhere. There's no ending to anything. So I don't know how you would end it overall, unless you told the story in some way, like you told the comic story, maybe. I don't know. But again, a lot of people aren't fans of the comics, and they know The Walking Dead for just what The Walking Dead is, like a television show, right? So yeah, I don't know how you would get around doing that. Like, there's a way you probably could, but I know how people are going to react to this. I know people are going to say, oh, a musical. Like, again, I think doing a musical episode is different. I think if you're doing like a show on Broadway, I think that's totally different, because it's something that you can just go see. You can go watch a show, go watch a play or whatever, right? Having an actual musical episode, that is very, very different. I think, you know, I don't know how I would feel about that, just because Tales of the Walking Dead showed me that, you know, I don't mind some of the experimental stuff like that, but they didn't really promote it like that. And so if you were to do a Walking Dead musical episode, you would have to not have it as a part of any sort of story in like one of the spinoffs and all of that. because it would really, I don't know, I just don't know if it would be a lot of fun. Honestly, I don't know how fans would respond to it. I think, like, you know, there's been a lot of TV shows that have done musical episodes that have actually been pretty successful. It would be funny to see the actors singing. Like, it actually would be pretty funny to see that, but it's just, you would have to do like a filler episode, and you would have to somewhat make a good story out of it and make it sort of matter in the story. I don't know how you would do it. I honestly don't know how you would do it. But the exciting part to me about all of this was the fact that she said that her and Scott Gimple had been talking, and then Andrew Lincoln said what he said about returning. So to me, it looks like they are working on a story. They're in communication right now, so that's really amazing. They're talking about what to do next, and they're working on stuff. I don't know how far along they are, but that seems to be sort of where things are. Maybe things stay like this for some time now. Again, like, I'm not expecting any sort of like update at all, or like any big update like this summer, like at Comic-Con. Like, next Comic-Con in 2025, that's where I can be like, all right, what's going on with all of this, right? Like, that's where I think a lot of us can be more excited about, you know, a potential announcement, because I think they're going to take some time to work on the story here. But who knows what they've been working on? I have no idea. Again, it might be one of those things where maybe they work on the story and it's actually really great, and they're excited to actually tell this, and so they'll make an announcement of a show. Maybe it's not coming out for a couple more years, but then they get to writing everything, right? But obviously Andrew Lincoln is going to want to know roughly what the story is, just in general, you know, before he signs on to actually do anything. So obviously they have to have a rough idea, and also just for AMC to be able to like green light anything, right? So yeah, I'm definitely going to be checking out this magazine though, the SFX magazine that comes out on July 10th, which is in 2 days, because there might actually be a lot more to this. Like, we don't know the questions that were being asked here at all, so I feel like there's probably a lot more to this right here. So yeah, I'm gonna have to check that out. But yeah, anyways, I'm gonna leave it here. Post all your thoughts down below. Would you be okay with a Walking Dead musical? And yeah, hope you guys all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.